We know her well, Mother Earth, Mother Nature, we know her well. She's in the Bible, and we can see it in the mystery traditions of Demeter and Greece, and the other mystery tradition, Ishtar being the other major goddess, who is the most popular goddess in the Bronze Age. Inanna is the older one, but the Ashtoreth, the ETH just means shame. They're the farmers and the shepherds of these rivals. The shepherds are the patriarchs, and the farmers follow the goddesses, and they have these sex religions, and they use plant drugs, and they get high and have orgies. In the Greek time period, it shifts from Ishtar to Dionysus, but Dionysus is worshipped right alongside Demeter. The Yahwists, the followers of Yahweh, they're extremely patriarchal. They are at war, but they want to get rid of the goddesses, and the ritual sex, use of plant drugs, all this stuff becomes forbidden. Say what you will about belief in God, religion matters, and religion drives people, and religion drives cultures. I firmly believe that we are going through a wars. The 21st century is all driven by wars of religion. Beginning phases of a new religious reformation that's going to happen. The feminine divine is coming back.
Welcome to the Gnostic Informant, and today you are about to attain true gnosis. And my guest today is Edward Dodge, author of a great book that everybody should go out and buy, History of the Goddess from the Ice Age to the Bible. It is a wonderful book. We're going to talk about it, and I'm pretty sure you're going to like this. So Edward, thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks, Neil. It's great to be here, and I really hope that we've got a lot to talk about, and so I'm down to go through it all with you. Hope this will be the beginning of a bunch of conversations.
Yeah, man. And what I want to do is I want to start from the beginning, because the goddess is as old as gods are. A lot of people think of God and they think of like their heads go right to patriarch. They think of Abraham, or they think of Allah or Yahweh or Zeus or whatever, Ahura Mazda. But before all that, there was in these Indo-European cults and all over the India, all over Africa, Babylon, everywhere. Even Israel had a goddess, had a wife of Yahweh. So you can make the case that there's a syncretism. Obviously, this is in your book, and it's very plausible. There's truth to this, especially because the planet Venus, we know, is identified with Ishtar, Aphrodite, and probably a whole bunch of other goddesses. For whatever reason, the Venus was a female entity to everywhere in the world. Also, in Gnosticism, you got Sophia, the holy goddess Sophia. They called her the mother of gods, and it always was a she. Wisdom is the word Sophia in Greek. Wisdom is always portrayed as female in the Bible, and that even goes before Gnosticism. In the Hebrew Bible itself, in the Songs of Solomon and the Proverbs, Solomon, who supposedly wrote that, he's talking to wisdom as if it's his mother, like a mother figure that he's praying to, a goddess. Yep. So it seems like there's a remnant there of old, ancient, maybe Asherah or something. But let's talk about
You're hitting all the beats, man. You're hitting all the dots, and I'm going to string all of that together into one meta narrative.
That's what I want to do.
One long narrative. I'm going to make the case, and I want to make this case publicly and with anyone that'll take the debate with me, that there is a divine mother. There's always been a divine mother. That in fact she came before the Father, and she's always been around. And she's still with us. We can see it today. We know her well, Mother Earth, Mother Nature. We know her well. I don't need to introduce her to anybody. And that she's in the Bible, that the Asherah is the Israelite mother goddess, and that there is this lost narrative that she is getting thrown out, that all the modern scholars acknowledge that the Israelites were polytheist. I mean, they're pagan. They're pagan before they became monotheists, and they were pagans first. And all the modern scholarship attest to this, and I'm going to talk about that. And that the last step, the final and most crucial step in the transition from Israelite paganism to Jewish monotheism was to depose the mother goddess and to kick her out. And that's Asherah. and they had to get rid of her and her religious traditions. And any expression of her traditions were persecuted and have been persecuted to this day. And I'm speaking specifically of any expressions of feminism and female independence, expressions of sexuality, especially women's sexuality, any kind of gayness, queerness. Transgender people were a big part of the story because they were high priests. The use of sacred plant drugs, cannabis, and psychedelics, that was my entry point into this whole story. The use of even abortions. These things were all there in the goddess temples of the ancient world. They were all there in the temples of Asherah. King Solomon was worshiping these goddesses. They fight about it during the entire First Temple period. It's a big culture war. It's like a big cultural schism, like racism is today in America. Like it's the same kind of dispute. They are having a fight over long-standing traditions that takes centuries to work out. And the Yahwists, the followers of Yahweh, are a reform cult. They're a reformist, revolutionary cult with new ideas. They're extremely patriarchal, and they are at war with some things we would agree with. They want to get rid of child sacrifice too, which is another story. But they want to get rid of the goddesses and the ritual sex, use of plant drugs, all this stuff. It becomes forbidden and is thrown out, and they stomp it out across history ever since. The idea that they banned paganism when Christianity becomes a state religion of Rome. Paganism and all of these old traditions are all exterminated with force and with violence. They were banned with prejudice. Then in the Middle Ages, they've got witch trials for centuries. And the old village wise women who were making up their plant medicines were murdered, burned at the stake, and killed in the most grisly, disgusting fashions. Then that carries on right through to the modern, persecution of gays, the war on drugs, which can be seen in the lens of a war on indigenous native uses of plant drugs, coca, cannabis, opium. These things were all traditional indigenous plant drugs that get punished by patriarchal Christian Muslim authorities. So that we can just trace this all the way through history. But the Bible story, I want to make the case that she's in the scripture and that you can see this story of this culture war and of her being exterminated. And I can show the connections in the parallel cultures where Asherah and Astarte and these other goddesses are parallel in other cultures. So we can see them, and we can see it in the mystery traditions of Demeter and Greece and the other mystery traditions. And we can see the parallels of Ishtar in particular running right through Mesopotamian history. And there's a whole meta narrative about Ishtar being the other major goddess, who is the most popular goddess in the Bronze Age. She is the single most popular deity in the entire Bronze Age, was Ishtar, and her various names. She got a lot of different names. Ishtar was Inanna is the older one. Yeah. Inanna is the older one. Ishtar is the most famous one. That's Babylon. In the Bible, she's Astarte or Ashtoreth. But the Ashtoreth, the ETH just means shame. All they're saying is shameful Astarte. That's what that means names.
That's a later interpolation, or basically like a polemic, basically. Later they added that, or is they always shame? But they always trying to shame that goddess because it's
slut shaming. They're literally slut shaming her because she is like a total sex goddess of ritual prostitution, and they celebrated prostitution. Wasn't just the first profession; it was the first organized religion. Like ritual prostitution was a reality, and they were doing it in King Solomon's temple. The Kadesha are the temple harlots that are in King Solomon's temple, but they only ever get mentioned when they're being thrown out.
And this goes to Rome too. I believe in Rome they had this Vestal Virgin cult.
Yep.
They took the virgin. If you were a certain age in this Roman imperial cult, the women were. They had to have sex with somebody. They made them do it against their will. Like this was like the virgin. It was like sort of like a sacrificial offering, but it was like.
I mean, as far as I know, the Vestal Virgins really were chaste and they weren't having sex, but I could be wrong. I haven't really studied the Vestal Virgins all that much, but yeah, they're definitely related. Women did divination and prophecy. There's a bunch of things that were like women's religions where women were respected and women had their sphere. And over time, as the patriarchy takes over, because we got to go through the whole timeline of history to really get the whole story. Do you want to go all the way back to the start?
Sure, let's do
Okay.
that.
So that's why it's from the Ice Age to the Bible. So to really like lay it out, we at least got to hit the big in broad strokes. When you go back to the Ice Age, or they call it the Paleolithic, the Stone Age, but I like to call it the Ice Age. No, it's more. I like that term. But the climate was completely different. The geography was completely different. We have these massive ice sheets, and the sea levels are 400 feet lower. So the coastlines were completely different, and the continents were like different because since the coastlines were lower, the continents were bigger. So like England was all part of the mainland, and the Southeast Asia, the Philippines and Indonesia, that's all part of the continent because the coastlines were so much lower. And the American coastlines go miles and miles farther out. And it's like around 60,000 years ago that Homo sapiens first leave Africa and venture up into Eurasia. They follow the Nile River up into the Levant, right through the Holy Land and into Eurasia. And at some point along the lines, they presumably have the cognitive leap where they presumably start speaking and having speech and start developing the rudiments of being Homo sapiens. Here, hold on one second. I gotta fix my audio.
Yeah. While you're doing that, I just wanted to clarify something I said about the Vestal Virgins. They were chosen at the age of 6. They would pick out the most unblemished. So there's like a parallel between like these animal sacrifices. They would find the best looking 6-year-old. This is crazy shit.
Okay.
And they would pick them, and they would go with the Pontifex Maximus, which is what we call Pope today in English. It's the same exact word, same title. Even right now, the Pope of Rome is called Pontifex Maximus. Julius Caesar's Pontifex. Long story short, they picked this 6-year-old, and she would go with the Pontifex Maximus to his dwelling and spend the night with them, and then she would have to leave her family and become part of the Vestal Virgins for the rest of her life.
I think in the olden days, the women were in charge of it. It was totally women's business, and the men weren't in charge of it. The women kept the money. The women had power and authority, and that it was only over time that the men take over.
They were the prophets too. Delphi, the Oracle of Delphi, was always a woman, never a man.
Right. So Ishtar was the goddess of divination and prophecy. She had a bunch of power. She was a goddess of love and war. So she's got all the sex and beauty of Aphrodite, but she also has all the war powers of Athena. I have a whole theory on this whole thing about how the Greeks reordered the goddesses to make them subservient to the patriarchs. But in the older versions, Ishtar basically is Aphrodite and Athena combined. Plus, she has the powers of divination and prophecy that they give to Apollo. And she's the Queen of Heaven, which was Hera's title. And she has the cycle of life ceremonies, the mystery traditions that are in Demeter. Like Ishtar has all of that stuff in one goddess.
I did a whole video about her as a savior when Tammuz dies and goes to hell every winter time, which would be now fall actually. Right. He dies in fall and he's down there for all winter, and then when springtime would come, Ishtar or Inanna, depending on which text you're reading, go down and save him. She was the savior, and then as she brought him out of hell, his resurrection brought forth plants and animals gave birth, thus springtime, which is a beautiful myth. But that is
the mystery religions. That's what all the mystery religions are.
And the hero is the goddess. In fact, Pythagoras traveled to Egypt for 10 years, then went to Babylon for 10 years, picked up the Isis cult, picked up the Ishtar cult, then went back to Italy and started the Eleusinian mysteries with another one with whatever.
The Eleusinian mysteries are older than that. The Eleusinian mysteries are already there. They are the
basically what I'm saying is he started the school of Italy or Sicily or something. But you're right. Those cults, those rites already were there. He just started his own school basically. And
no, absolutely.
What he did was he really studied under the mystics of Babylon and Egypt and brought it all back. And like you said, but this is all going back way farther. But go ahead.
But this is the heart of the story. This is all of these traditions are goddess religions. So you've got in Egypt, it's Isis and Osiris, where Osiris dies and Isis restores him. In Greece, it's Demeter. She's the good goddess. She's the goddess of the earth. She raises her daughter Persephone. Usually it's a male figure that dies. Ishtar and Tammuz is the oldest one. It's actually Inanna and Dumuzi is the oldest one. That's the Sumerian version. And then their names are changed in the Babylon. When the Babylonians take over, it's a different culture, different language, and they change the names to Ishtar and Tammuz. And we know that that is the Israelite tradition. I can say with 100% certainty that this is Israelite paganism as well, because Tammuz is in the Hebrew calendar. He's one of the months of the Hebrew calendar is the month of Tammuz, and it's named for that god. And it speaks to the fact that this was Israelite paganism as
The month
well.
of July.
Yeah, it's one of the months. I'm not sure which one it is.
No, I did a video on this. That's why I remember that.
Okay, yeah.
The reason why it's July and not springtime is because they're celebrating Tammuz in his greatest height, which is summertime, mid-July, midsummer.
Right.
So midsummer is Tammuz.
All right, there you go. And so these are the goddess traditions, and this is what the tradition of Asherah and Astarte. This is exactly what they're doing, and it's a very sexual religion. Like they believed that sex makes the flowers grow. Basically, sex is a form of creation, and through the logic of sympathetic magic, like begets like. So things that are forces of creation beget forces of creation, and they want to make the flowers grow because these are farmer traditions. Um, they're the farmers and the shepherds are these rivals. The shepherds are the patriarchs, and the farmers follow the goddesses. And they live in the cities, and they have these sex religions, and they use plant drugs, and they get high and have orgies. And this is well attested all through history. In the Greek time period, it shifts from Ishtar to Dionysus, but Dionysus is worshipped right alongside Demeter, and they're worshipped together. So all the sex flips over to the Dionysus is like a gay god. He's like extremely gay.
Oh yeah.
So, like,
He's worshipped. He's like the origin god.
Yeah. And so is Ishtar.
And he's followed in worship by these Maenads, these women that live in the jungle. They're basically like they're wearing like animal skins. And he chooses Orpheus to be his high priest. Orpheus, whose wife Eurydice dies, and he tries to get her out and fails.
Another dying rising god story.
But here's the crazy part. He doesn't become the high priest of Dionysus till after that. And what happens is he's getting basically hit on by all these women in ancient Greece, and he's rejecting them. Then it says in Ovid's Metamorphosis that he ends up being with little boys. It says it right in the book, right in Ovid's Metamorphosis. So he's
I never read that.
and that's while he is the high priest of the cult of Dionysus when he's doing that stuff.
Right, because Eurydice doesn't make it out. She doesn't make it out of the underworld. She turns around and she dies, and Orpheus is so heartbroken that I guess he rejects later lovers and stuff, but he becomes this prophet of the afterlife, and he's deeply associated with these traditions.
And the weird part about this Orphic mystery is, like, after everything I just said, he becomes the high priest. The Maenads are kill Orpheus under the command of Dionysus. Dionysus is just mad, and he's so unpredictable. He has his own high priest killed, and his blood is pouring into the river. I can't remember the name of the river, but the next chapter in the book of Ovid's Metamorphosis is the King Midas story. Everyone knows King Midas, the Golden Touch story. Right. And when Midas repents for having this lust for gold, Dionysus tells him, "Okay, fine. Go and wash your sins out in the same lake that Orpheus dies in, where his blood is in." And that's how King Midas gets healed from his golden touch. It's just fascinating how all these Orphic mysteries all tie together. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that is interesting. And then as you get into the Bible, though, the logic of monotheism of Yahweh is that there is no mother goddess. There is no goddess at all. They don't recognize the feminine divine at all. And in fact, in the Hebrew language, there is no word for goddess. They don't recognize the concept of a goddess. They don't recognize the concept of Mother Earth. And they are openly hostile to it. And so it's this story of them divorcing and kicking her out and then eliminating her from their culture. And that only happens. So they fight about it through the entire First Temple period. And right up to the end of the First Temple, the women are still worshiping the goddesses. They talk about it. The prophet Jeremiah, after Jerusalem has been destroyed and they've gone into exile. And Jeremiah, this group is in Egypt. They're not in Babylon. But in Jeremiah 44, he criticizes the women for their worship of the Queen of Heaven. And they yell back at him and they say, no, everything was fine when we were worshiping the Queen of Heaven. It's your fault. It's Yahweh's fault that we got destroyed. And they have an argument, and Jeremiah just basically stomps off and says, fine. And like the women hold their own.
And I just want to add something real quick, because there's something that sticks out to me in the second book of Kings, where this is right before Nebuchadnezzar sacks them and conquers Israel. And the writer of Second Kings tells us that under this king Josiah, or I think it's Josiah.
Yeah, Josiah. Yeah.
Josiah. They says that Josiah goes around and takes down all the poles of Asherah.
Yep.
And he takes down all these Asherah symbols everywhere. All these gods everywhere.
Pole is important. It's a totem pole, basically. It's
the reason why it stands out to me is because the modern reader today reads that and says, "Oh, he's doing a good thing for Israel. This is what everyone would have done back then." However, why would you have to outlaw the worship of Asherah and Baal if it wasn't even happening? Which tells you it was running rampant before his reign. Which tells you it was a part of Israelite religion.
Right.
That to me is the second book of Kings telling you that this is when the religion changed.
Oh, absolutely. And so, and the biblical writers are keen to say that these are foreign gods and that they've been backsliding with these foreign gods, and that's just propaganda. It's not accurate. These are the native Israelite gods. Baal was the native king of the gods. He's the son of El and Asherah. Yahweh was a new god who was competing with Baal to become Lord. Baal is king of the hill, and Yahweh is trying to knock him down. So we get the battle of the prophets on Mount Carmel. So we can go through the whole book of Kings. That's the main thrust of my biblical research, and we can nail down that entire story. Because I think it's all historical, basically.
And that's what I want to do. That's exactly where I want to hone in on. And I'm glad we got to this direction. But before we do that, what happened? Why is there a sudden shift in consciousness of religions where they want to go from having goddesses to all of a sudden being completely patriarchy? What happened? Was it Zoroastrians that had this monotheism? Is that the influence? That's what I'm trying to figure out. And then we can get into Kings. But
all right. So again, the broad historical timeline. You've got the Ice Age, where we see after the cognitive leap, we see just a few distinct forms of culture and the rise of religion. And those are cave paintings, ritual burials, and Venus figurines. And they make Venus figurines, these little carved little statues, like yay high, a few inches tall. They make those for tens of thousands of years, all through from like 50,000 BC all the way through history. They're not making any male statues to go along with it. Archaeologists have found thousands and thousands of these things all over Eurasia, which totally indicates worship of the mother. And then we see them, and then we have the Neolithic Revolution. We can talk about the Younger Dryas and the transition, and that's a whole other thing. I don't want to sidetrack. But the Neolithic Revolution is basically 10,000 years ago. 12,000 years ago, everybody is wiped out. It's a mass extinction event with the Younger Dryas. And then it's the survivors that start planting around 12,000 to 10,000 years ago. And we get into the Neolithic, and these are the first settlements. And these are the farmers, and they form the first settlements. And these Neolithic settlements. We can see a bunch of things in their art. First of all, we see that they're egalitarian societies with men and women treated equally and having equal rights. We can tell by their diets, by their burials, that men and women are the same. There's no signs of hierarchy or dominant, hierarchy structures that we have today. There is no signs of warfare. There's no signs of weapons. There's no signs of real, conflict beyond, some, it's not to say that nobody got fought at all, but like there's no signs of warfare. And that lasts for a few thousand years as these Neolithic settlements become increasingly successful until like the fourth millennium BC, 3000 BC on, or from like in the 3000s. That's when we see things transition into civilization. And in 3500 BC, Sumer is the first place to really break through into civilization. And the hallmarks of that are a few things. One is they've got bronze. They've got bronze, which gives us weapons. And this is the introduction of swords and shields and chariots. They've got horses, so now they have horses and chariots, and we now see warfare, and we see kings taking over. Um, we also the settlements had become successful enough that there was something worth stealing. In the beginning, there wasn't much theft because there wasn't anything to steal. But now that the settlements are successful, people start marauding because that's simply the fast track to getting rich is to like conquer your neighbors, steal all their stuff, and send all the subjugated people into slavery. And this is the beginning of civilization. We start to see class based society. We see warrior kings led by men taking over. Um, we see women being pushed into a more and more subordinate role, and um, and it's ruled by kings. And this is civilization. And then soon after that, we get the invention of writing around 3200 BC. So, like from 3000 BC on, we have writing. Basically, we have stories, and we can start to see the gods. Um, and now we have like the first pantheon of gods in Sumer, and it's led by, and we can tell that we're in the patriarchy already because in that time with the first anthropomorphic gods, it's led by the king of the gods, and it's led by a warrior king. And these archetypes stay with us. And over the next 2,000 years, we can trace it in mythology and in the laws how women lose their rights.
Now,
And
why do you think? Why do you think these? How did this happen? Like, why do you think they wanted to
it's
do
just
that?
warrior men taking over, and they don't want to listen to the women. The women had authority. Like the priestesses really had authority. Like
Right.
the men listened in the Neolithic. I think in caveman days, we're fed this story that in caveman days it was like, the caveman comes in with a club and knocks a woman over her head and takes him over his shoulder and basically has his way with her. And like the world's been led by rapists since time immemorial. And I
Yeah.
just don't think that's true at all. I don't think that's true in the least. I think in hunter gatherer days, the tribes were led by women, led by the mothers. And the mothers would tell their sons and tell their husbands who to go fight. Like, go fight that guy. And they would listen to the women. And the women chose the leadership. That's what I think it was. Because that's what you see in modern Native American cultures. Like they have a chief who's a man, right? He's gonna be the war chief, he's gonna be the guy with the authority. But he gets chosen by a council of women.
Yeah.
And
I,
and then
I'm wondering. I'm wondering if there's a correlation between the rise of like this bronze and iron being used in weapon and warfare, which is dominated by men because where men had the physical makeup for war.
yeah,
I
obviously.
wonder if there's a correlation between that and the rise of gods, or like male gods dominating. And then you have
Oh,
these
absolutely.
emperors. You have these male emperors, like Nimrod is not a real person, but he's an archetype, and I guess he's based off the historical Naram Sin of Akkad, or also Sargon of Akkad, which is his grandfather. Now, I'm wondering if that's what led to these rise of these gods, is people seeing characters like that rise up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think every mythology is a reflection of the culture that's writing it. And so every culture, this is something I learned when I was young. They talk about how the Egyptian gods were meant to be a reflection of life on earth, like a mirror image. And so the hierarchies of the gods reflected the hierarchies of human beings. And so the king of the gods reflected the authority of the human kings. And so you can't have, doesn't make sense to have human kings if like his authority is not reflected in the religion of the people that are following that king. And so they have the mythologies are all every mythology is fiction. And they're all fictions that reflect the culture.
I was like, oh,
Um,
really? They are?
right? I mean, including the Bible, it's mythology too, and it's another bit of fiction. But it tells a story, and it's not to say that they should be dismissed just because they're fiction. They're laden with like meaning, and they're laden with that culture's insights. And you can sort of learn from what that culture understood and like what insight did they have to the mysteries of the universe that I can learn from. And everyone's got something to teach you if you look for it.
Yeah. Okay. So now we can get into I just wanted to clear up this whole evolution of these goddesses.
And then the last piece on the historical timeline, and this is
Sure.
important,
Sure.
is the Bronze Age collapse. Are you familiar with the Bronze
Mm.
Age
Oh
collapse?
yeah. Oh yeah.
All right. So from 1200 to 1000 BC, it's a complete wipeout in the Near East. All the cultures are completely demoed. The old forms of writing go away. Cuneiform goes away, never used again. Hieroglyphics goes away, it's never used again. There's no governance for 2 centuries. And this is the point where the Israelites emerge in Canaan. Because before that, and we know this formally because Egypt ruled Canaan. Egypt ruled Canaan with an iron fist from 1450 to 1140 BC, give or take. And we know the date that Ramses VI withdrew from Canaan.
I was going to say,
And
because
that-
this is like the 19th dynasty of Egypt, or is it the 18th?
yeah,
or 19th?
I mean, it wasn't. He was not a powerful pharaoh. And that's the time period when Yahweh emerges on the world stage, because Yahweh is not a Bronze Age god. He wasn't around. The Israelites were following El. The pagan Israelites, they never heard the name Yahweh. Abraham never, the historical Abraham, if he existed, was not worshiping Yahweh. He was worshiping El.
Right.
And that's entirely different. And they're
Yeah,
two
especially
separate gods.
if we're to believe that he's from Ur Babylon. There's no Yahweh over there. There is a Yah in Egypt who is a moon god. His name's Yah or Jah.
Yeah, you know, and there may well be, he may well have some roots as some minor tribal deity like that are older. I'm not denying that possibility, but he's not an important god. He's not a major god.
No,
he's
not
not
at all.
like a moving armies and like reshaping empires kind of god.
Right.
He is some minor figure.
Yeah, he's not like he's not like Ammon or Osiris. He's just the moon god. Yeah.
There's a million gods, you know.
The million gods, yeah.
And so the Israelites are worshiping El, and they have the full pantheon of gods. They're Canaanites. They have the full Canaanite pantheon, which is the same as the Phoenicians, who are all over the Mediterranean at this time.
Very dominant presence. They found the city Carthage, and they found a new Carthage. You know what's funny about Carthage? Carthage actually means new city in Phoenician. So the new Carthage, so the Phoenicians, they go to Carthage, they settle a new city because the Babylonians came and chased them out, basically. So they find Carthage, they start the Carthaginian Empire. Then they go to Spain and find New Carthage, which means new city.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's a lot of theories that think they just are populated the whole Mediterranean.
I think some degree. All right. Some degree. That was one of the most fantastic parts of that I learned about in this whole research, because I didn't know anything about the Phoenicians, and they're like totally
so
cool.
fascinating. Yeah.
They're really fascinating. But they held on to these old gods, and they had these old Bronze Age gods, because the Phoenicians didn't get what they're the one people that didn't get wiped out in the Bronze Age collapse. The Tyrians survived. They've got, do you know about how Tyre is like an island city?
Yes.
And so they have this impregnable fortress, a kilometer from shore. And so they survived the Bronze Age collapse.
Yeah.
And so
Tyre was still there when Alexander the Great came in, and he sacked Tyre. That was one of the cities.
And that is also a very dramatic story unto itself.
Right. Yeah.
Which we can get to. I don't want to. There's so many different rabbit holes we can dive into.
Yeah, we're already all over the place. But let's hone in on that king.
I need to make this point clear, though, that Yahweh and El are two separate gods. And Yahweh is a reformer god. It's not monotheism, but what Moses presumably introduces Yahweh. Somebody invented it, so we'll call him Moses.
Sure.
He wants to change traditions. He's a revolutionary. He's like Martin Luther. Like, this guy wants to like change how things are done. They don't like, in the three big reforms, this is my thesis. The three big reforms are idolatry. He wants to end idolatry, which is like the actual practice they had of having gods in the stones and gods in the statues and things. They didn't like that. They wanted to change that. They wanted to end the practice of child sacrifice, which is the Abraham and Isaac story, which we can dive into.
Yeah.
They were doing that. This is a Carthaginian Phoenician practice. The Baal worshippers did in fact do this horrible thing where they not just sacrifice people in times of duress, but actually slice the throats of their infants during good times, just to for vows to the gods for some reason.
I want to jump in for a second. You mentioned, you're talking about the El and Yahweh, and I think a good example of a fragment of what you're saying shown in the Bible itself is the book of Job, because the book of Job talks about the sons of El align themselves in front of, and basically they're painting a picture that El is like this king, he's the judge, and then you got Yahweh and the Satan who's the accuser, and then you got, they don't obviously doesn't mention any other gods in that, but it's sort of Elohim being a plural term. I think when I read it, it seems like there's some fragments being passed into the monotheistic text that survive from the
Oh, there's
polytheistic.
a bunch of them. That's not the only one. Psalm
Okay.
82 and Psalm 87, where they talk about the sons of El. They talk about the divine council and a couple different. There's a handful of references. Genesis 3, where he says we're gonna, Adam and Eve have become like us. Um, he's going to become gods like us. Like there's a bunch of references to it. Um, and then when you read the Ugaritic texts, if you get a chance to read those, I highly recommend it. Um, this book here is a must read.
So the version I have is it's a Oxford's World Classic of Myths of Mesopotamia. It has the Artaxerxes, it has the Enuma Elish, it has Descent of Ishtar, Descent of Inanna, it has the Theogony of Dunu. It has all the ones that everyone talks about.
Right. Those are all the Mesopotamian ones, and those are all important. And
Enuma Elish.
yeah, I argue that you can draw a straight line through all those traditions right through the Bible, that it's all part
Oh
of
yeah.
one grand
I
meta
had
narrative.
I had Dr. Josh on, and he pointed out to me the mind-blowing fact about Genesis 1:2, how it says in the beginning there was the primordial waters. That word in Hebrew is tehom. The word for tehomat, is the in the Enuma Elish, the first sentences in the beginning was the primordial tehomat, the primordial waters. It's the same exact sentence.
Yeah, I write about that in my book. I learned that from Joseph Campbell. There's
Oh
a book
yeah.
that Joseph Campbell wrote called Goddesses, but it was only published after he died. It's like collection of his essays. He didn't actually write the book himself.
Fascinating.
Um,
What a
and he
great author.
talks about that. And that blew my mind that when it says in the spirit of God hovered above the waters is the goddess. That is the primordial
Tiamat.
goddess.
Yeah.
It's Tiamat,
Tehom.
yeah.
Tahamat means is like a actual, it's like a pre or a suffix. So it's the same word, just drawn out with at the end. The
And
same word.
it's like they took the Newman leash and just took an eraser to everything where it says goddess and just let the rest of it intact. It was like
Right.
an exercise in writing her out of the mythology.
And the best evidence for that is when you read Second Kings and you're like, why are they why are they outlawing all these things that the Israelites supposedly don't do? If these priests are so holy and so following these laws so good, why do they need to outlaw the goddesses? Why do they got to take down all these poles? You only outlaw something if it's happening rampant, if it's a problem.
Exactly.
So there you go. They're giving themselves away if you're a critical thinker. But if you're not a critical thinker, then you don't think about stuff like that. But
Well,
you and
also,
I,
it was written at a totally different time for a totally different audience.
sure, it's
And
a
so the
polemic.
audience at the time was not, this is all like basic, like this is all understood.
That's
Like,
what it's a polemic. It's basically trying to hide the past by stomping it out and by saying how bad it was, even though you were the one doing it.
and the Garden of Eden story is exactly that. The third thing that they want to do is eliminate the Kadesha, who are the temple priestesses. They call them the harlots, um, and all of their traditions and all of the authority that the women had, because they actually had quite a bit of authority. And so they want to get rid of them. And they've got transgender priests too. And these are in the Bible, the Kadesha and the Kadesh. And the word means holy. The word Kadesha that is the Hebrew word for holy. These are the holy women.
Hakadesh is the holy. It means Holy Spirit. Hakadesh,
Exactly.
Kadesh.
And so when you see in English, the name is translated as temple prostitute, or in the King James Bible, there's two words there's a zona is a regular prostitute, like a brothel, street prostitute, but a Kadesha is a holy woman who does have sex too, but there's sex rituals. The King James Bible, so those are two separate words in Hebrew, zona and Kadesha. And so normally it'll get translated as a harlot and a temple harlot or a temple prostitute. King James Bible just calls them both harlots. It
Yeah,
doesn't
James Bible
even call the one a temple harlot. It's just harlot.
Yeah, there's a lot of really terrible translations in King James. Like, we can that's another topic, but yeah.
So the point is, but to your point, they had these Kadeshas in King Solomon's temple. They're there in the time of the judges. Judah, the story of Judah and Tamar, which is, during the patriarchal times, Tamar is dressing up as a Kadesha. She's putting on her veil, because one thing the Kadesha did is that they were veiled and they were anonymous. You didn't know who they were. They're these sex priestesses, but you don't know them. You can't identify them in public. They're completely anonymous. And they're like mystical and mysterious. And they've got they do they're midwives and potion makers, and they do mystical weaving, and they're like some of the most respected women in the community. There's a law in the Babylonian, in the Hammurabi's code of laws. They talk all about these consecrated women in the Mesopotamian laws, and what rights they have, and um, children born to them belong to the mother and not to the father, and they don't have a father. They're the virgin born. The priests are called virgins. The goddesses and the priestesses are called virgins. So a child born to these temple priestesses is virgin born, and they're like, this is where the whole narrative of virgin born heroes and legends. Sargon of Akkad was virgin born this way.
Yeah.
So this is a long-standing tradition, thousands and thousands and thousands of years old, and the Yahwist are at war with it, and they want to eliminate it, and they want to get rid of it, and it takes them 600 years, 700 years of fighting about it, and it's only during the exile, because they don't succeed. They have reforms under King Hezekiah, and then again under King Josiah in the books of Kings. In both times, the reforms are unsuccessful. As soon as that king dies, they go back to the pagan ways. The moment that king dies, which is also the same thing that happened in Egypt during the earlier attempt at monotheism under
Akhenaten.
Akhenaten. The same thing happened. As soon as he died, the people went directly back to the paganism. They
Who's
hated it.
who? According to what I've been reading about that time period, which is the 18th dynasty, by the way, I did a whole video on this. Nefertiti, which was his wife,
Right.
she was the only one who kind of kept the people from rebelling. She sort of was like, she sort of played the role as like the good mother, while he was the bad guy that changed.
Good cop and bad cop and all that.
Yeah, it's really fascinating that the woman presence was there to keep the people in order, and she was
important.
She was a brilliant diplomat.
I believe it. I believe it. So they're fighting about it the whole First Temple period. They're not successful in their reforms. The northern kingdom of Israel was totally pagan. Like they didn't even pretend to be for Yahweh. They were, and in fact, I think partly a religious schism is that split. And then it's only during the exile when they're in Babylon that these priests, when the cult of Yahweh is practically barely even exists anymore. It's just a candle in the wind. That they are basically, the Persians liked them. The Persians defeat the Babylonians, and the Persians take over after King Cyrus. And the Persians are pretty friendly to the Hebrews, and they are hanging out with the Zoroastrians, and a series of Persian kings sponsors the Hebrews to write their sacred texts and to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. And it's all under Persian patronage. And it's only at that point that they fuse El and Yahweh together, write the Garden of Eden story that mythologizes the fact that the women are being made subordinate permanently, that it's a way of saying that all these women's traditions are over, because every single symbol in that story is a goddess's. The tree of life, the snakes, the entheogenic plants, the whole hating on farming. It's just like a whole polemic against farming. That Adam is punished by being turned into a farmer. That the first thing to do is make clothes out of a fiber, hemp. And then God says, no, I don't want you making clothes. I'll give you animal skins, because he likes shepherds with their animal skins. And then they go into Cain and Abel, which are their first children. Cain is the first farmer. Cain and the Canaanites. Cain represents the Canaanite farmers. Abel is the good shepherd. And what is Cain? He's a vicious, treacherous murderer who murders the perfectly innocent shepherd boy, as told by a bunch of shepherds.
Plus, you got
another polemic.
Plus you got the layer of the meat offering versus the vegetation offering.
Yeah, he rejects the vegetation offering.
Yeah, vegetation goes back to the goddess days. This new meat thing is this patriarchal concept. Exactly. And then obviously everyone knows that Eve had to be the one to pick the apple, because it couldn't have been Adam. It had to be a female. There's a parallel in Greek culture where Pandora is also the first woman, and she's also the source of all men's troubles. It's these patriarchs, because in the Bronze Age collapse, I argue part of my thesis is that the Greeks and the Hebrews are parallel cultures. Zeus is born the same time as Yahweh. They're both come out of the Bronze Age collapse. They didn't exist before. They both replaced their El, who is Saturn.
They replaced the earlier tradition. They both fight against.
It's a parallel right there. El gets replaced by Yahweh, and Saturn gets replaced by Zeus. The same exact time period.
And all the Titans correspond to the Canaanite gods. It's that same generation of Bronze Age gods.
Do you think the Anunnaki is a similar there's the Anunnaki, and then there's the other. I can't remember the names of those. Like basically like the Titans, kind of. Do you think that's a parallel there too, or do you think?
All right, so I've got a whole theory on this.
Okay.
This would be a sidetrack if we want to
Okay.
talk
So
about King.
we could do it. You could touch on it real quick if you want.
Real quick. I think that the Greek theogony that talks about the history of the universe and how the Olympians came to power. I think that story is actually a key, like a map key to like the development of religion over time. That the first you've got Gaia, and Gaia is alone. She's the Virgin Mother, and that corresponds to the Venus figurines of the Ice Age.
Yes.
After a while, they figure out, well, mother needs a father to go along with her. So after a while, she gives birth to her own husband, who is Uranus.
Yeah, and that's heaven. He becomes heaven.
And
literally,
then,
that's what that word means.
The heavenly father and the earthly mother. These are the primordial divine couple. That's the core of my tradition. The earthly mother, Mother Earth, is the wife of the heavenly father.
Now, some people think that Hesiod, who wrote that, was earlier than Homer. I don't know. I'm not the I don't know that.
We do know.
I just know that there's
both of those. The writings themselves are among the first writings when the Greek written language was first invented.
It's archaic Greek. I'm going to show it on the screen right now. It doesn't even look it looks almost like Etruscan. It looks like it's like Norse almost. Now, I know it's not. I'm not saying that it is.
Well, it's copied from the Phoenicians.
It has that. Yeah, exactly. It's clearly Phoenician. Clearly Phoenician.
The Greeks and the Hebrews both copy the Phoenician language. And this was something that blew my mind when I learned this. Because like I was always thought of like the Hebrew Bible as being sort of like out of time and like timeless and not really on the historical timeline. Like Abraham, he's like kind of like out there in like mythology, and you can't really place him. I mean, that's sort of the way it's kind of presented to you when you're in church. Like,
of course,
it's sort of like so in the clouds of history, you know.
I went down the same path you're talking about right now, and
then when I learned that the Greeks are totally contemporary, and that all of the writings of Greek mythology were written down the exact same time as the Hebrew writings, I was like,
there's some scholars that think that Plato influenced the Jews. It wasn't the other way around. Some scholars. I'm not saying most of them, there's a few.
They knew each other. These cultures all knew each other. They totally interacted. So there was an interplay and a cross culture of influence. And what we know is such a fraction of what was actually going on at the time. So these cultures are totally contemporary, and they're following a parallel pattern of the patriarchs finally taking complete control once and for all. And the Greeks, the Hellenistic Greeks, they have the Olympian gods. They're totally contemporary to the Old Testament, and they're doing the same thing where they put the women down, but and they invent a new pantheon of gods, and they reorder the goddesses. And so they take away, in the Bronze Age, the old goddesses were not submissive to men. Asherah, Astarte, and Anat is the third one from the Bible. They're not submissive goddesses. They do not submit to any male figures at all. But when they reorder the goddesses, for the Greeks, they make all the goddesses submissive to Zeus, with the exception of Demeter. But really, everyone's submissive to Zeus. And the Hebrews take it even farther. They just kick the goddesses out altogether and say there is no goddess. But they're both follow the same trajectory of putting women into a totally subordinate role. Because Greek women were totally locked down. Greek and Roman women, culturally speaking, were totally locked down and had like no freedoms or real independence at all. They're expected to stay home with the babies and the weaving and stuff. And they did not really have much of any independence at all. So this is where the men finally just take over, and then they confirm it all in mythology.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify my source. I want to cite my source for that wild claim about Plato. That is PhD biblical scholar James Strong, who actually thinks that Platonism is the vital structure of Christian theology, and that Plato also, his Timaeus and Critias, is what influenced Old Testament theology as well. That's some wild stuff. I'm going to look into that. I don't know much about that. Most scholars don't agree with that, but I just thought I'd say that before people start yelling at me in the comments.
All right, that's all good stuff.
I
mean, I have sources for everything I'm claiming, and I have sources in my book. And
history is all theory anyway.
And for the most part, I'm just trying to draw a logical thread. I don't claim to be the raw scholar on any of this stuff.
Right.
So I'm relying on what I ascertained in my mind to be best of breed scholarship, and I follow that, and
Well,
and I'll give you my sources where.
well, no, well, here's the thing. I can tell you from my experience when I was back, actually, when I was a Christian, when I really wanted to prove that this was true, and I thought that if I study all these ancient religions and all this ancient history, I'm gonna come out as being vindicated because Christianity is so true because of what it did for me. But what I found was exactly what you're saying. I'm not joking. Everything that you found in your studies, I found in my studies with the history and the evolution from polytheism, the goddesses, and the removal of certain parts of theology and certain parts of religions and changing over time into this monotheistic patriarch that we have today. I
And
couldn't agree more. And I
yeah,
bet
and
you,
you know what we both have in common, you and I, is we're both using the internet for this
yeah,
research.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
This is actually no, this is a really important point because this is all even 20 years ago. You would have had to been a complete specialist to dive into the substance of this work.
Or you had to have
I
access,
am not a Hebrew scholar. I do
or you had
not
to have
speak Hebrew.
access to a lot of universities, a lot of libraries.
It would not have all been in one location.
It would take you years to get to this information.
And but
Years.
now with the internet is a total game changer,
It
and it
is.
allows a non-specialist to dive in and take an unconventional approach, which is what I did because I have my own unconventional approach to studying history, and I was able to dig out a thread that your traditional scholar would not have noticed because it's just not part of their training.
I had Dr. McDonald on my show about 2 weeks ago, and he gave me the best analogy in the world. He's talking about me and Derek because I showed him an amulet of Dionysus looking like he's being crucified, and we're talking, and he's a two-time PhD. He teaches at like Columbia or some crowd. I don't even know. I probably just made that up, but he's the real deal, right?
Right.
He's made a great analogy. He said, "You should not downplay your intellect. You should not." He's like, "You are no amateur." I felt so good hearing that. And he goes, "But here's the thing, though. You're a fox, and say I'm a groundhog." He said, "Us groundhogs, we're disciplined. We stay in our lane, but we go deep and we pick out all the facts. We pick out all the details, and we don't come back up with our theories unless we have everything in order. You foxes will go anywhere. You'll get your hands dirty. You'll jump in the water if you have to. You'll go everywhere. Now, it could be dangerous being a fox. You might get misinformation, but you see everything." And I'm like, wow, that's a really good analogy. Thanks for that. So if anyone wants to find that clip, it's in my video with Dennis McDonald.
All right.
Yeah. But we got about 8 minutes left, maybe 10 minutes left. Let's sort of wrap this thing up.
All right. We kept mentioning the Book of Kings, so I want to come back to the Book of Kings. My position for my thesis is that the Book of Kings, First and Second Kings, that it is basically historically, it's all talking about actual historical events and actual historical people. All of the kings and everything, at least from like 850 BC going forward, are totally confirmed, and it's all confirmed events. But as far as I'm concerned, the Book of Kings starts with the death of King David and covers the whole life of King Solomon. As far as I'm concerned, they're all real people, including King Solomon. It's totally propaganda. It's totally built up with. It's totally embellished and it's legendary and all this stuff. Nonetheless, I do believe King Solomon's a real person who really was doing these pagan traditions, and that the temple to Yahweh that King Solomon built, it was sponsored by the Phoenicians. It's a Phoenician style temple, and it's a pagan temple. It's a temple to Yahweh, and Yahweh is just another pagan god.
In fact, King Hiram comes from
Tyre.
yeah, and to help
Tyre.
They're like best friends. And then not on top of that, that's the Phoenician connection, but the pagan connection is who's his little girlfriend he has, Sheba, the queen of Sheba, who
Right.
we know the Arabs were the biggest pagans in the world. They had the Kaaba, it had 365 gods in it. So here's this King Solomon hanging out with King Sheba. What are they doing? I mean,
well, Queen of Sheba, by tradition, she comes from Ethiopia, and the Ethiopians have tons of stories about her. So I write about a whole thing, and that extends right through to the Solomonic dynasty, right through the royal lineage of Ethiopia, right through to Haile Selassie, with the Rastafarians in the modern day, and you can trace that all the way through. I know I have some Ethiopian friends, so I talk about this stuff quite a bit with them.
Fascinating, and I love their the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has their Bible that has like Enoch. It has all these other. It's in this
Right.
Aramaic text. Fascinating. Their whole entire history is deep, and it's very connected to the
Oh.
Hebrew
Oh,
religion.
yeah, and they got Beta Israel. They've got the original Jews that are there from before the exile. They were there because they followed Menelik in the Ark of the Covenant. You know, Menelik is the son of Queen of Sheba and King Solomon.
They claim to have the Ark of the Covenant, which I don't.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's
yeah.
true.
Who's to say they don't?
Maybe they do. Hey,
I think the Protestants, the white Protestants, just refuse to believe it because they had to send Indiana Jones out looking for it. But if he'd been a proper enough scholar, he would
now
just go out to
Maccabees.
the town of Axum.
Second book of Maccabees says that Judas Maccabees or Jonathan Maccabees, one of those brothers, brought it to Mount Sinai and buried it somewhere on Mount Sinai, and that's where it says that it is still.
Yeah, competing claims. I guess we'll have to find out who's got the real one.
That's what's so beautiful about history. Is it's all theories. But you have to do your work though. You can't just say whatever you want because you're going to get.
But you can say the Ethiopians have this tradition, and there is an actual location you can go visit today.
Absolutely,
the town of Axum, where they claim to have the Ark of the Covenant.
Absolutely, and it could be true.
It could be true.
Very plausible.
So the Book of Kings, we can do a blow by blow, and it takes you right down through the whole thing. And as far as I'm concerned, it's you got to read it as propaganda, but understanding that they're talking about real historical events, and that all the kings in it are all. So yeah, if we don't have enough time, but we could do a whole thing. I would love to go through it. I'm ready to defend my case with anybody.
Yeah. That's going to be a fascinating video in itself. Why don't we just sum up and sort of like tie everything together? What we
all right, and then the final point would make to sum it back to the Mesopotamian mythology, that we can draw a direct line from Inanna and Dumuzi, or Ishtar and Tammuz, right through the Epic of Gilgamesh and right through King Solomon and the rest of the Book of the Kings, and that straight line is Ishtar, and we can see how with Ishtar and Tammuz is the first of the shepherd kings, and he needs to win over the love of the love goddess to win her approval to come in and become the shepherd king, because she was with the farmers. And so the shepherd needed to win her over. But then Dumuzi is the first shepherd king. But then later on, Gilgamesh is the next one to be famous that we know about, legendary shepherd king. They're all kings of Uruk, the city of Uruk, which was Ishtar's city. Gilgamesh comes along and he insults Ishtar. She tries to seduce him and he insults her, says no. And she gets angry and sicks the bull of heaven down, and then they kill the bull of heaven and yada, yada. And the whole story. And then you got a bunch of stuff in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Shamhat, the harlot who is with Enkidu, like she's one of these Kadesha. And it just shows how the Kadesha in action. And so then you place this through, take it to the Bible. King Solomon is worshiping the same goddess. They're having these sacred marriage. Is the Hieros Gamos is a sacred marriage ceremony. It's one of the most important rituals that they have in Mesopotamia. And that's where it's presumably a sex ritual where the king has to go get the approval of the goddess, to confirm his kingship every year. And he's got to go behind closed doors with the high priestess, who they're all ritual sex priestesses, and presumably has sex with her. And presumably he's got to really give it to her. Like, he can't just be like, it can't be a quickie. Like, he's got to satisfy her, because like if he's not virile enough to like satisfy, then these are guys who have to lead the troops into battle. If they can't lead the troops into battle, they're not fit to be king either. So if he's not fit to like be virile enough, he's not, off with his head, he's not fit to be king. This is an example of the women having authority. The women get to choose.
Yeah.
The women have a say on who becomes king. After a while, the men are like, no, we're not going to listen to these damn priestesses. Get the hell out of here. Especially when you can imagine that like it's some marauding band who's killed all the men. Now they've come in. It's a new set of men. They're not going to listen to the old priestesses of the people they conquered. No, and they kill them or enslave them. And after a few centuries of that, the priestesses just go away. They don't have any rights at all. But King Solomon was still worshiping her. And the Song of Songs comes from that tradition. The Song of Songs is totally drawn directly from these sacred love poetry of the Hieros Gamos. It's a long genre of poetry. And so King Solomon is the wisest one. And then he is the one, he's the father of the wisdom traditions. He's a central point in this whole story because he's the one who transmutes the goddesses into Sophia. He invents that entire tradition.
That's
And he is the,
Gnosticism, basically. That's Gnosticism. That's
and
the
it is Gnosticism, absolutely. And so he is the one, he sits in a lion throne. The lions are a really important symbol to goddesses. That's another thing.
the Sphinx was a female.
Yeah. And so they sit in this lion throne, and that's King Solomon is sitting in that lion throne where he's got the approval of the goddess. And then he gets horribly criticized for it in the Bible for doing this. And they try to explain it away by saying, oh, he only did it late in life. And it was only because he listened to those damn women.
Right.
But no, he was really doing it his entire life. And he is the most successful one. And the Hebrew writers, biblical writers, just they hate that. They have to try and explain it away. And they're really perturbed by the fact that their greatest king was not, was kept following the goddesses, and they hated that. They had to try and explain it away.
I just want to say this. I feel like when our civilization, as a global civilization, when we started to sort of devolve into this patriarchy, monotheistic worldview, we lost half of our potential, basically.
Absolutely.
Like if you go back far enough, like 500, 400 BC, Democritus, Epicurus, they're already doing atomic theory, and they're already like they have a scientific mindset. They're very wisdom lovers of Sophia, and then all of a sudden they go into this church era, this sort of, and then Islam comes out of that, and all these, we backslide. We become apes again. We keep fighting over land and going crazy. And then I feel like now we're seeing women start to rise up into areas of power, and it seems like we're getting our full potential back. I think women and men were meant to be equally, and have equal power. I should say. I don't know if power makes sense.
Yeah, equal rights, equal respect.
But that we're meant to do that because that's what we are as a species. We're not operating at our full potential when it's just half of us trying to navigate the ship, if that makes sense. That's a good analogy.
Absolutely. And
so I'm glad to see things are starting to change in that direction. Can only get better, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it happens after the Industrial Revolution. Changes things enough that women start to get their space back, and then the cyber revolution we're going through now is changing things again. And now you see trans people coming back out.
Absolutely.
And this is like a surefire sign of like things that are happening that what we're experiencing culturally right now has like a theological reverberation. Like these aren't, you say what you will about belief in God, religion matters, and religion drives people, and religion drives cultures. And I firmly believe that we are going through wars. The 21st century is all driven by wars of religion, and that the wokeness is the beginning phases of a new religious reformation that's going to happen around the feminine divine is coming back. And I'm not trying to start a religion or anything, but I'm happy to talk about all this stuff.
Oh yeah,
and
it's fun.
There's totally things are happening at a religious level. Like the spiritual Christians are always talking about spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
They've been trying to exterminate expressions of the mother ever since they took power. And this is, persecuting gays and persecuting trans people, persecuting the use of plant drugs, psychedelics. Why do they hate psychedelics so much? Why do they hate sex so much? Why is Christianity so fearful of sex? Yeah. They hate it. They want to exterminate it.
Yeah, it's easy to control. It's easy to control the world and bid your will if everybody's in line with this sort of biblical philosophy and this patriarchal philosophy.
It's about authority.
If Carl Jung was here right now and seeing the feminism movement play into as it is, he would say, because he was a Gnostic, by the way, he would say that the Great Mother has awakened, and she's battling against the trickster, and he would sort of play on that archetype of the Great Mother coming back and taking.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah,
I totally agree with that. And I want to debate. I want to debate Christians about the Divine Mother, because I do believe that Christians and atheists, fundamentalists and atheists have been debating in circles for centuries now, decades, having the same circular arguments, and neither one truly wins, because the atheists can shoot down fundamentalism. It's easy to shoot down biblical literalism, because biblical literalism doesn't make any sense, like at all. So it's easy to shoot down that sort of like small-minded fundamentalism, but it's not so easy to shoot down God in the mystical sense. And atheists don't have good answers for like the deep existential questions. They don't have. They sidestep, Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and all these guys. They sidestep those like deep existential questions.
It's not
Totally.
that they just don't care. They just
No, they
don't.
don't care.
They don't. People like that with that scientific method mindset, they only want to talk about what's proven and what they can observe.
What they
Not-
can rationalize.
and
Exactly.
they have the
rationalize.
and I agree with what you're saying. They don't have the answers for what happened before the Big Bang, all those questions. But they people like that are important to have because it sort of keeps everyone fact so we don't get all over the place with
Oh,
our theories.
sure. Yeah.
You sort of have to have that. You have to have Matt DeLondes. You have to have Aaron Ra. Those people have to be present in the conversation to keep things in order.
Well, they're fighting the fundamentalists, and that's an important fight because
Absolutely.
we have a fight, and it's the same in the Islamic world too. Like fundamentalism is on the rise, and they're not tolerant, and they're violent. And violent, intolerant fundamentalism is a threat to everybody that doesn't agree with them.
Yep.
And they've been violent for centuries, and they're going to be violent again. And so it's important to have this debate, but at the same time, there's a lot of folks who say we should get rid of religion altogether, and they imagine a world without religion in the future, and I just utterly reject that. We're going to still have religion. The Heavenly Father and the Earthly Mother, in my opinion, will remain firmly entrenched mental archetypes for human culture for centuries to come, and the stories will change, and the beliefs will change.
There's paganism on the rise right now. You got like YouTubers like Ocean Keltoy and or something the Red. I can't remember his name. I wish he's cool too.
Yeah.
But basically what I'm getting at is it's starting to come back a little bit where people are starting to look, and they're not looking at it dogmatic. They're looking at it realistically, like through archetypal lens. Like
Right.
I'm going to invoke the goddess of whatever mood they're trying to be in, or like for example, Mithra is the mediator for written laws. If you make a pact with somebody, you invoke Mithra. So they sort of invoke certain gods and goddesses in certain situations to sort of make a pact with themselves. And what it does is you're diving inside yourself and pulling something out of you and trying to emulate something to change your fabric of reality and to maneuver around the world. It makes sort of sense. It does.
Yeah. And I think as long as you understand that these are symbols and projections of the human mind that help us like make sense of like we live in a mysterious world. We're just smart enough to realize we really don't know what the fuck is going on. And science is great and I'm all for it. But the more we learn, the more we realize how little we know. It doesn't really make the mysteries go away. It just makes the questions more profound. And so I have no problem like praying to whatever gods you want. The only lie is to say the stuff is literally true.
Right.
And if you don't believe it exactly the way I believe it, then I'm going to persecute you as a heretic and a blasphemer. I'm going to burn you at the stake.
Right.
Like that, I don't agree with.
Yeah. Well, listen, History of the Goddess from the Ice Age to the Bible. Go and check that out right now on Amazon. And you have just attained true gnosis.